How many of you recognize this man? This is the streamer slash game developer known as Pirate Software. There's a decent chance you've seen him before if you've ever perused the YouTube Shorts tab. His shorts where he talks about the games industry and other issues that come to his attention while doodling on MS Paint became extremely popular around 2024, leading to a massive spike in growth for Pirate. However, this newfound popularity has had the natural inverse effect of leading to more eyes on Pirate Software, and this led to a lot more scrutiny over his actions, big or small. Whether it be shitty behavior during World of Warcraft raids, unpopular stances on a movement designed to help preserve games, or just general arrogance or boasting about things that are exaggerated or simply untrue. Pirate Software has found himself the subject of many minor and major controversies over the past year, which has created an entirely new group of people who hate Pirate and dedicate themselves to documenting his every misstep, sometimes to a frankly unhealthy degree. But today I'm not here to discuss that, as there's already a slew of videos available talking about all of Pirate's drama. Instead, I'm here to discuss the actual video games created by Pirate Software and his team. In late 2016, Pirate Software would leave the mainstream video game industry after 10 years in various roles at Blizzard and Amazon Games to create his own indie game studio, also known as Pirate Software. However, these games have found themselves the subject of their own controversies after much of Pirate's baggage came to light. So for this video, I want to find out if this criticism is justified or is simply the result of Pirate's newfound infamy, starting with his first ever release known as Champions of Breakfast. Released on June 23, 2016 for a mere $3, Champions of Breakfast is an arcade shooter twin stick inspired by classics such as Asteroids. As the title implies, the game is heavily themed after breakfast, with your ship being various kitchen appliances like toasters, blenders, and egg beaters, and the power-ups are foods such as orange juice, coffee, or jalapenos. Enemies include sausage links and bottle openers. Before I say anything about the game itself, I will acknowledge that this isn't exactly what I would call a fully fledged indie game, as according to Pirate Software himself, the game only took 24 days from concept to release. And for a price as low as $3, it might seem really needless to criticize a title like this. However, there is something very important that I feel we need to acknowledge before we look at this and every other game featured within this video, and that's the fact that, as of the making of this video, Champions of Breakfast is the only fully released game created by Pirate Software in his nearly 10 years as a game developer. The other titles we'll be looking at are in various stages of development, but all of them are not fully completed. As for my thoughts on the game itself, I would genuinely struggle to call it average, as there are many small things in the game that add up to being a confusing title that somehow feels below the standards of most actual arcade shooters. What does the basic gameplay loop of Champions of Breakfast look like? Before you start any run, you must pick a ship, with each one having a different set of stats and firing types. Once you've picked your vehicle of choice, you're immediately thrown into a small tutorial where you must shoot the targets on each side of the screen. This tutorial happens every single time, regardless of how many runs you've done. A very minor complaint to start, but I'm not sure why this is the case considering how simple the game's controls are. Only utilizing the twin sticks, a button to shoot, and one to use special moves. Regardless, once the game actually begins, you'll be met with various enemies coming at you from different sides of the screen. By defeating them, more will spawn, and after clearing out a certain amount of waves, a boss will appear. Defeat the boss and a new special weapon will drop, followed by more enemies until yet another boss appears. Defeat that, and you'll get the choice between 3 different sub-weapons. After picking one, you'll be sent to the next board. And that's pretty much the entire gameplay loop of Champions of Breakfast. Fight enemy waves, defeat a boss, get a power-up, rinse, repeat. With only 5 unique boards to speak of, you will very quickly exhaust most of the content in this game, likely within 30 minutes of playing. There are some other pieces of content, such as unlocking ships, although how I was actually unlocking them was very unclear to me, and a selection of difficulty modifiers, but the core game doesn't really change too drastically. These modifiers do sort of bring up probably my biggest core issue with the game, and that's that it's just really easy. All of the enemies' bullet patterns are extremely simple and easy to dodge, with even most bosses not really offering much of a challenge. This comes in part due to one of the game's ships. The egg beater I mentioned earlier is the clear best ship in the game, as its firepower is honest to god comical. Look at how quickly I defeated this boss and how easy it was for me to dodge dodge each of its attacks during the process, partially due to the ship's slim hurt box. Not only does it hit the hardest and is the hardest to hit, it also has the ability to regain all of its health back with the orange juice, and there aren't that many special weapons in the game, so the chance of getting it early is very high. I think the weakness of the egg beater is supposed to be that it has low health, but you still get 5 hits before you die, and with near infinite healing, it's nearly impossible to get much of a challenge here. Even with all of the difficulty modifiers on, the game doesn't get much more engaging. In fact, on my final run for this recording, I ended up just letting myself die because I figured it would happen sooner than something within the game actually besting me. Side note related to those modifiers, every single time you turn the game on, you have to reapply whatever modifiers you had on previously. I have never played a game before that has difficulty modifiers as a prominent feature, not save them when you come back. Very strange. Enemies in the game are just far too simple for them to be any real challenge, and they almost always specifically come in groups that contain the exact same enemies, so there's not really a ton of variety with specific groups. Another thing that makes them quite easy is the fact that enemies only start spawning once another wave has been cleared, meaning you can safely take your time taking out enemies as there's no threat of more spawning. This removes a pretty massive part of arcade-style games like this, as there's no pressure to take out enemies quickly in fear of more spawning and getting overwhelmed. Even with enemies on screen, there's often very little threat, especially with melee-based weapons, as they just mindlessly move towards you. And since no other enemies spawn to make this a threat, I can safely move around in a circle. Boss fights are even less threatening, having somehow more predictable and easy patterns compared to enemies. Some bosses have shields, which confused me at first, until I figured out that you have to kill the ads the boss spawns. Why even have a boss if all it's gonna do is sit there and do nothing? At least some of the other armored bosses move a little, but this gazebo literally just sits there and does nothing but spawn enemies. Not exactly an engaging boss fight. While we're on the topic, what's up with the game's theming here? I thought it was supposed to be about breakfast. Why are we fighting a gazebo? This isn't even an issue isolated to this one boss, as in general, the game's entire theme is not very consistent, with you fighting things like razors, spray cans, or TV remotes. Something even as basic as just the game's theming feels kinda off, as the game focuses more on household appliances than breakfast. Could have potentially been cool if the game maybe utilized other regional styles of breakfast. British, Japanese, Germany, almost every continent has different styles of breakfast, so I'm surprised they didn't try that. Anyways, bosses that don't have shields really aren't much better. There was even one that was so easy I managed to beat it while barely moving. I also found this clip and it greatly annoyed me way more than it should.
We have Champions of Breakfast, which is a twin-stick shooter that we made in 24 days from concept to release on Steam. Blew up. It was really, really awesome. And that game is pretty difficult, so if you're into really hard arcade games, that's the kind of thing for you.
I want to just clarify too that I'm not asking for some insane shmup level challenge here. I just don't think the basic gameplay here is engaging enough to make me want to play this for more than a few minutes. Again, I do acknowledge that this isn't exactly the peak of his career by his own admission, but I do still think it's not a particularly fun game at all. It feels like the kind of game you'd find within another game like Cyberpunk or GTA, or even something as simple as a Game Jam game. Not something I'd willingly play on its own at all. The only other thing worth mentioning is the game's achievements. You may notice that this game has a staggering amount of Steam achievements. As soon as you boot up the game for the first time, you are immediately bombarded with several achievements right off the bat. This is because, according to Pirate himself, the achievements act as a save file, which supposedly acts as a way to curb piracy.
Tried to find a way so that our game wouldn't get pirated, because it'd be easy to pirate it. We knew that you could break Steam DRM very quickly. This is your save file. When you first start the game up, it actually checks what achievements you have, and it unlocks powers based on your achievements. This is actually the save file for the character, so you can't pirate it because you can never use the achievements.
I'm not sure why you would fear piracy for a game that makes a profit of $2.10 on average, but either way, this claim is completely untrue.
I was curious how long it took for the game with the unpiratable DRM to be cracked after it was released, and this is what I found. 1 day and 17 hours after the game was released on Steam, there was already a home rip floating around. If you don't consider home rips to be valid, I also checked to see if any known Where's scene groups had a crack for the game. The scene group Simplex has also had a crack crack for the game floating around for years at this point, so that unpardonable DRM has been soundly defeated multiple times just after launch.
I guess I can also mention some glitches I had while playing, including this one where the enemy went off screen, preventing me from making progress for a bit, and this one that happened while I was just trying to get some extra footage. I have no idea what's actually going on here, as all I did was start a run, and this somehow led to the game's pause menu becoming the main menu. And that's kinda it. That's all I really have to say about Champions of Breakfast. It is a below-average arcade shooter, honestly not worth the $3 it costs. I fully believe you'll likely get more out of pretty much any basic arcade shooter you can find. In spite of its short and uneventful development, this game is still notable as the only actual full video game released by Pirate Software, as his other main title has, well, quite a troubled history. Strap in, folks, this is gonna be a long one. Heartbound is a non-traditional RPG inspired by SNES-era classics like Earthbound, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, Secret of Evermore, and Super Mario RPG. It is also the personal passion project of Pirate Software, as he cites it as the main reason for becoming an independent game developer, having early builds dating back all the way to October of 2015. Unlike his previous game, Heartbound was actually crowdfunded on Kickstarter. The campaign began on February 24th, 2017, asking for $5,000, and managed to raise a staggering $19,272 through the overwhelming support of 684 backers. The game was first released into early access on December 24th, 2018. Heartbound was originally set to release in December 2017. However, it is now mid-2025 and the game is still in early access. Nearly 7 years have passed and yet the game remains unfinished. So what happened to Heartbound? Well, the game's launch would be delayed a full year, instead releasing on December 24th, 2018, and would instead release into early access, only having 2 of the planned 5 acts fully playable, and steady progress would be made on Animus up until September. Pirate states that Heartbound's third act, Animus, had already had all of its assets created, and that it wouldn't take 6 months to release. This promise was initially kept, and progress seemed to be made, as a small portion of Animus would release the next month, and steady progress would be made on Animus up until September 7th, 2019, with Pirate stating that this would be the final patch before Animus would release. While this promise wouldn't come true, on January 12th, 2020, the first character's stories would be added to the game, and it would gradually receive other updates and character arcs up until December of 2023, where substantial updates would come to a complete halt and the game would be left nearly abandoned for a full year. During this time, Pirate Software would consistently lie about the game's progress on stream to viewers who asked, only to admit in an update video released on January 19th, 2025 that he had done virtually no work on the game over the past year.
When we look at this, Animus is 98% complete, and the overall game is 89% completed. The Clash is super ready, and that's kind of what we're working on right now. Animus is at 99% completion. That 6 months ago, I was also really close to finishing Animus, but then the community exploded in size, and now I'm finally actually close to finishing Animus. For real this time. I'm really glad. The next update should finish up Animus, which I've finished the writing for finally. With Heartbound, I've actually been working on it off stream every day, like I have been for months, and I'm done with most of the writing for the end of Animus. Like, it's basically done. How's Heartbound's progress? Heartbound's doing really well. I actually finished a whole bunch of like dialogue stuff for Animus last night, and basically I'm just working on the combat scene for the end of Animus now, which is nice. It's like the last piece I need. Finally finished the grand majority of writing needed for Animus and Heartbound. Yeah. Animus is basically finished. I'm pretty happy with it. This was my whole last year, and navigating all of that stuff took an immense amount of time. And because of that, I stopped working on games.
I am a fairly patient person when it comes to waiting for games to release, and I fully understand that making a fully fledged video game is a massive, expensive, and time-consuming process even for some of the industry's biggest companies, let alone one person. So I am perfectly understanding of the fact that Heartbound has taken a long time, but has all of it been spent on a worthwhile product? To start, let's take a brief look at Heartbound's website to get a better idea of what the game is supposed to be like. Here, Pirate talks about some of the unique mechanics featured within the game, such as items and consumables. Consumables have been replaced with what I feel are more interesting mechanics. Powers that can trigger in combat under certain conditions or from investigating objects in the world, exploration and player choice. Every time you interact with an object, talk to an NPC, forget to turn off a light switch, or disregard a sparkly bush, the game remembers this and will change subtly for all further interactions. actions. Secrets. Heartbound will be filled with hidden content in every way I can find to hide it. Every public announcement, character, or even the game's files may contain another piece of the puzzle. Combat. The only statistic in Heartbound is lore's health, and the only progression is your skill as a player. All of combat situations involve mini-games based on the enemy you are currently fighting. You can resolve combat situations in a number of different story-changing ways depending on how you handle yourself in those mini-games. I must admit, all of this does sound fairly interesting, and if executed well, could make for a pretty fun and dynamic RPG with tons of replay value. Let's see if the game lives up to that. You start off by waking up in your bed. This is Lore and his dog Baron, who is awoken by the sound of Lore crashing into his wall after an explosion on his light switch. Lore wants to go back to bed, but Baron demands breakfast. After getting dressed and stepping out of the room, we are met with our father, who asks us to take out the trash. This moment is notable, not really for the scene itself, as not much happens, more so for how Pirate describes the scene in one of his YouTube shorts.
In the beginning of the game, you'll see a light on coming out of your parents' room. This light will be purple. As you get closer and closer, Lore slows down. His heartbeat starts to beat faster. The music dies down. The volume of the storm dies down. His heartbeat becomes the only sound. And when you get closer and closer to this, you expect a jump scare. You expect a loud noise. What happens is, the door closes, there's no sound, the heartbeat stops, and the thunderstorm slowly rises back into place.
Now, let's look at the actual scene within Heartbound. Doesn't really resemble the actual product now, does it? Let's hope this isn't a trend. After feeding Baron, we head out to take out the garbage, and after that, we head back inside and Barrett comments on how he's had a really good time. Somewhat odd considering how little we've done so far. I assume he's trying to build and showcase the bond between Lore and Baron, but this line comes out of nowhere given the context. I feel like this line would make a lot more sense if there was more we did together, but as is, it just kind of feels strange. Either way, we head back to bed and are greeted with a dream where Baron gives us some encouragement, stating that he'll always be there with us. We are then abruptly awoken to a horrible sight. Baron is missing and the house has been completely trashed. Heading outside, we're greeted with a brief section involving pushing these logs. This is one of 3 puzzles in the entire game, and I really wish that was a joke. After that, we come face to face with the monster causing the calamity and enter our first battle. According to Pirate Software, the inspiration for Heartbound's battle system is the WarioWare series, using rapid-fire minigames for combat rather than a traditional turn-based battle system. Unfortunately, this manifests in a very shallow system that forces you to play the same 4 rudimentary minigames ad nauseum until the boss or Lore dies. One of them functions like Punch-Out and has you dodge the boss's attacks. Another one has you press the corresponding buttons to destroy rocks or simply click on them using your mouse. Another has you volley an energy projectile with your axe. And the last one is literally just Simon Says. The entity yells out a series of buttons and you repeat them in the same order. Those are the only attacks you need to worry about, and outside of a basic counter you get, there is no other interaction you can have with this fight. There is no other way to approach the battle, which massively goes against what he stated earlier about combat. This first encounter is completely scripted and ends after a certain amount of turns when Lore is saved by a character known as Binder, who brings Lore to his home and immediately sends him on his way inside this grandfather clock. If you're at all confused by the story in this game, then don't worry, I was too, and the multiple playthroughs that I've done didn't really help to illuminate much of the game's true narrative. This Binder character especially confuses me since he gives virtually zero introduction for who he actually is, and barely has 5 minutes of total screen time in the entire game. Despite this, the website treats him as one of the game's main characters, having his own dedicated art that looks really nice, but it's for such a nothing character. While we're on the topic, I do want to give one piece of praise to Heartbound, and that's that the game's actual sprite work is overall quite nice. The art alone does a lot of heavy lifting for the game, as the writing can be downright frustrating with how much it teases you with vague exposition rather than giving you a true sense of the characters. Regardless, the inside of the grandfather clock houses our second puzzle, although I'm hesitant to even call it that. that. In order to progress, you must make this laser hit these little statues. The solution to this is to simply push these blocks to the furthest point they can possibly go. You don't have to actually align something yourself, you just push the block as far as it can go and the puzzle is solved. The next room's puzzle is similarly dull, as all you need to do is flip 3 out of the 4 switches into different positions. And the final room's puzzle is exactly the same as the first. To solve it, you once again push these blocks as far as they can go. Congratulations, we have solved the second to last puzzle in all of Heartbound. What an adventure we've been on. At the very end, Lore discovers a mysterious book known as the Artifact, which Binder immediately warns him not to get close to, before we are transported to a new area shrouded in darkness. I'm confused. What was the actual reason for Lore going into this area? The dialogue implies that Lore is indeed here to obtain the artifact, but the minute we get near it, there seems to be something wrong with it. But it's never actually elaborated on what the problem is or why it's dangerous now. The writing in this game just confuses me. I understand not wanting to play all your cards immediately, but this game has given me so little to go on that it makes everything in the story so far feel hollow, especially with all the dialogue that appears while I'm exploring this area, like, "You're already out for blood." I haven't even done anything, and the game is already chastising me for my actions. This vague dialogue berating you continues as you mindlessly wander this area until you find the entity again and begin another fight with him, this time for real. In spite of this fight plays out identically to the previous one, with the only major difference being how long it goes on for. This boss that you are currently watching is, as far as I'm aware, the only actual boss fight you get into. 7 years of development, and in all 3 of my playthroughs, I only had 1 actual battle in the entire game. And it's not even a very good one, lacking any of the promised features we heard about earlier. There's absolutely no actions I can take in this fight to alter the outcome, nor are there any battles present in the game that do offer that. Unless I'm truly mistaken, there really is only 1 actual fight in the entire game. Even if I am somehow wrong and there are potentially other fights I missed all of them during my 3 playthroughs of this game. There's not really any way for me to view that as anything other than bad design, especially since I really did want more combat encounters, since from here the game becomes dreadfully boring. By the way, you can actually lose this battle with no consequences as the exact same series of events play out, win or lose. So one of the game's other major features, exploration and player choice, has still been a complete non-factor. Regardless of what happens, it's revealed that the entity we've been fighting is Baron, and he is then turned to stone by the artifact, spreading his souls into 3 separate parts. This concludes Act 1 of Heartbound. Not a fantastic first act in my opinion, but at least for me, I think the game actually peaks at this part. If for nothing else, then simply the fact that it is the only part of the game that felt like it was trying. As from here, Heartbound evolves into a mindless slog devoid of any substantial gameplay or gameplay period. Outside of the boss fight at the end, nearly the entirety of what we just experienced was actually almost the exact same as Heartbound's initial demo given out on Kickstarter. According to Pirate Software in a 2017 interview at Comic-Con, this demo was made in only 6 months.
And the other one is Heartbound, which is a more story-driven RPG. And we've been working on that for about 6 months. We put it up on Steam Greenlight, it got rank 1, so it was massive success. And then we put it up on Kickstarter, and it got funded in 24 hours, and then ended up with 400% funding. So people really, really like the game. And we have an hour-long demo here and on our website.
So, in 6 months, Pirate was able to make a nearly fully complete Act 1, and yet in 7 years, he has been unable to finish Act 3. What possible reason could there even be for such a massive shift in the speed of your output? According to Pirate Software, the biggest hurdle making the game take so long is actually the writing.
When the primary bottleneck isn't code, it's actually writing?
Now, as someone who takes their content very seriously, I know full well that writing is a very difficult process. And for me personally, it does take a pretty long time to get right. With that being said, and having experienced the actual quality of writings within Heartbound, I have no idea how the game's writing could possibly be the thing holding the game back. It's not like the game uses particularly complex language or anything. Again, I know how hard it can be to write, but 7 years for what is actually in Heartbound currently is frankly beyond ridiculous considering the caliber of writer Pirate is. Anyway, Anyways, from here you're allowed the option to pick from one of two sections. Act 2 on the left side, known as the Tower, and Act 3 in the middle, known as Animus. We'll be starting with Act 2 since it's the only one here that's fully complete. Act 2 begins with Lore awakening inside this small office space. This will be our final puzzle in all of Heartbound, so savor it while you can. Here, we must find the correct combination for this keypad. You can get a hint towards the answer by checking the lone computer in the room, which also tells you that you can skip the puzzle by simply inputting 7 ones into the keypad. And now that we've done that, we have completed the final real puzzle you will ever see in Heartbound. I have to ask, why include a hint towards the puzzle and a way to simply brute force it in the exact same dialogue? I understand wanting to include something to make the puzzle easier for people who can't solve it, but I didn't even ask for this. Why would a player ever actually solve the puzzle as intended if they're given an easy way out before you can even start piecing an answer together? Once we're out of the room, we meet our dad, who asks us to leave immediately before she finds us. And then, instead of throwing us out, he instead moves us to a new area. Well, I say new, but it's actually just using the same darkened space we saw in Act 1, and unlike that one, that was at least a real area to walk around in. This one is a simple hallway ending with a chamber, once again housing the artifact. You may think there's some puzzle here, but there actually isn't. Just flick the switches on. No critical thinking needed. After this, you're transported to a new area within the tower and are greeted by a character who immediately begins messing with lore. This is Joe Regular, and I assume he's supposed to be funny, but I never really found anything he said particularly humorous. From here, you're free to explore these cubicles, but there's virtually nothing to do outside of read some flavor text and maybe pick up the occasional sock. Which reminds me, I haven't talked about this element yet. Scattered throughout the game are various socks you can collect, although they do nothing. You can view them in your room after clearing an act, but they still serve no real purpose. Pirate seems to have a weird affinity for socks as they're brought up and seen in this game way too often. Usually followed by how, sweaty and wet they are. Not really sure if he just finds it funny or wanted some memorable element to make the game stand out, but either way I find it strange. There are some other items you can collect as you go that you can also view in your room after an act is finished, but they similarly serve no purpose. I didn't even get an achievement for collecting any. Back to the game, in order to progress you have to get a job within the tower, which is given to you by a computer known as Oscar, who puts you to work in the cafeteria. Here we participate in one of 3 mini-games featured in Heartbound. All you do is grab one of 2 different food items and dispense them in maybe 5 different patterns. Nothing happens should you fail or succeed. You would think this could have been some kind of opportunity to give the player some kind of reward for doing better or worse, but the game progresses the same no matter what you do here. Maybe you could have gotten a worse job that's harder if you failed, or an easier job should you succeed. I thought this game was supposed to be all about little choices I make that affect the grand picture. Thus far, nothing I've done has seemingly had any impact, and this isn't really something that'll change as we go through this part. As from here, there's virtually no gameplay to speak of left for Act 2. This singular, mediocre minigame is the only source of actual interactive gameplay to speak of. For the next hour or so of gameplay, you'll be doing fetch quests. What exactly do I mean? Well, after that thrilling job, you're placed to work in IT, and instead of creating another minigame of some kind, you instead collect various items for different characters. Around this time, we get introduced to something I like to call a music transition room. You see, Pirate software seems to lack the ability to naturally transition his music. So instead, he creates empty corridors where once you reach a certain point, the music will begin to transition. Is there any real reason to do this? Most RPGs I played usually just start a new song the moment you enter a room. Is there any reason not to do it just like that? Why create these empty rooms that the player is forced to walk past every single time just for a music transition that doesn't even sound very good at all? Now's also a good time to mention there's no run button in Heartbound, so what you're seeing in my footage is the only speed Lore can move at. I know Pirate said he wanted to make a non-traditional RPG, but why forego some of the genre's most basic quality of life features? Anyways, after you're done collecting all these items, you are then reassigned once again to the mailroom, where Lore begins stamping letters as they come. This isn't a minigame or interactable for the record, Lore just does this on his own, and as he does, the area around us begins to darken as Lore has thoughts of comfort in his new situation. This scene is apparently Pirate Software's favorite in the entire game.
Your favorite part of Heartbound? Yeah, it's a scene in the tower in which you are stamping envelopes. It's my favorite for two reasons. One, it's a clever ruse. It's a scene that doesn't end until the player actually touches the keyboard or the controller. It can actually go forever. It's infinite. And two, it's kind of a story about how it feels to be stuck in a shitty job, one that you get nothing out of, one that's just something you do every day. And it talks about that the entire time that you're sitting there doing it. You can actually leave instantly.
There's a few issues I have with this. For one, this kind of mindset of being completely fine with complacency in a job is not one I can relate to personally. My bigger issue though is why would Lore or the player even think like this? We've only been here for less than an hour, and in that time we've done virtually nothing outside of a couple fetch quests and one singular bland minigame that you don't even need to actually interact with to get through. Why would that make the player or Lore himself feel comfortable here? Maybe if we spent a longer amount of time here doing manual tasks and being rewarded for it, I could sort of see how the character might feel more comfortable here. But as is, like a lot of things in this game, the scene feels like it comes out of nowhere to make this part of the game feel like it has some sort of meaning when up until now it really hasn't. The other thing Pirate enjoys about this part is that you can actually leave as soon as you move, so on repeat playthroughs I just skipped it since it serves no real purpose to me. After this, we are promoted to manager and head to a new area that looks almost identical to the previous one and begin doing more fetch quests. This begins by us giving Joe sunglasses based on the deal with it meme. What a fucking dated joke. Anyways, after that, Joe tasks us with getting coffee via this coffee shop that is once again impeded by a music transition room. After giving Joe his coffee, we are given the ability to whistle. The only thing we can do with this new ability is use it on the pool directly next to Joe in order to get a locket. This is one of several items you need to reach the boss of this act. Small thing, but at that point, why not just have Joe give me the locket as a reward? Why make this slight roundabout way to get the item? Was Pirate just that big of a fan of this whistling portrait? Another small thing, but every time you collect one of these items, a small cutscene plays every single time, gradually adding to the scene with each new item. The other items are gotten by using a coin given by Joe on this vending machine. Another hangs from this part of the coffee shop, which means if you didn't get it the first time, you have to walk through the music transition room again. Another one of the items is gotten via this gym, which to access, you'll have to go through another music transition room. I guess now might be a good time to talk about the music. Pirate Software seems pretty proud of the music as he actively plays it on stream and boasts about the fact that his game has over 100 unique tracks. However, for the most part, I didn't really find any of the music in the game too memorable. No offense to the composer, but most of the music didn't do much for me. The best one is probably this track featured within the Grandfather Clock. Anyways, the last item is obtained in the room in front of the boss's door. This last item only appears once you've collected all of the other ones. Nothing in the game indicates that the item has appeared here, so you just kinda have to guess where it is. Not super intuitive design. After collecting it, we learn a bit about Lore's mom, who appears to be rather abusive with how she talks about him. If it wasn't obvious already, the boss of this area is the mother herself. However, this is not an actual boss fight. Instead, she attempts to gaslight Lore about his actions during the game, and you have to deny them to deal damage. Like our previous boss, nothing actually happens should you lose, so any ability for the choices I make during a fight to have consequences is once again lost. I genuinely don't know what the actual purpose of this entire part of the game is. Oh what, am I here for this really unsubtle Pokemon reference? That's my favorite part of the classic SNES RPGs. surface level pop culture references. There is virtually no gameplay during this part, and the story has continued to disappoint. Having 2 entire acts of the game go by without truly explaining or elaborating on anything is unbelievably frustrating for me as a player. And the next part of the game, Act 3, Animus, won't really add anything to this playthrough. As mentioned before, Act 3 is unfinished and has remained that way for 7 years. This is in spite of the fact that Pirate Software and his team were able to create virtually all of Act 1 within 6 months, and the game's second act being made within a year. As for what is within Animus itself, this act opens up with Lore waking up inside of the home of Circe, an anthropomorphic possum. The entirety of Animus is made up of characters like this, kinda like Winnie the Pooh if it was made by modern-day furries. Lore remarks on these characters by saying, "Talking animals. I finally lost it," in spite of the fact that Baron, Lore's best friend, is himself a talking animal. I have no idea why this line exists, and it's not even a good joke, so I'm really not sure why he says this. Leaving this area, we are immediately assaulted by an armadillo named Emio. After defusing the situation, we are given a pocket watch by a character known as Ramel. This will serve as the driving force of the narrative for this part of the game as Lore attempts to fix the watch. Heading down, we hit yet another music transition as well as a general area transition which doesn't look very smooth at all, before arriving at Emilio's home. Talking to him, we get something fairly unique, an actual, real, true choice on what to do. Keep in mind, we are nearly at the end of what currently exists for Heartbound, and only now do we have any sort of choice on how we want to progress. But wait, doesn't this kinda go completely against how he said Heartbound would handle the way choices work? Here, Pirate laments the implementation of choice-based games having simple dialogue options decide the course of the adventure. But then what the hell is this? This is exactly what Pirate said he didn't want to do to set Heartbound apart. In my experience, there are no small choices I made that impacted the story whatsoever. Everything I did across my 3 full playthroughs of this game all amounted to nearly the exact same shallow, boring adventure. There is almost nothing present within this game that resembles how he sold it to people, and I do mean that literally. Look at what features he advertised the game as having on Kickstarter. Follow Lore and Baron on their adventures through time and space? Well, Baron only follows you for an extremely short portion of the beginning and doesn't accompany Lore in his adventures otherwise. Handle combat through a series of unique mini-games reminiscent of WarioWare. Well, I guess this is technically true. There is one battle in the game you can engage in with mini-games, but I'd hardly call Simon Says unique. More importantly, I find it kind of insane that you're comparing yourself to WarioWare when you're failing to even take into account one of the most basic aspects of the game, its variety. Literally the first set of microgames featured within the original WarioWare has more variety than the entirety of Heartbound. For that reason alone, I think it's more than safe to label this as another failed promise. Change the story through exploration and interaction with the world, not just through major dialogue events, but small things like leaving the lights on, investigating a book, or ignoring that Viking brand dog food. We've already gone over in depth why this isn't really a thing, so again, a failed promise. A massive series of optional cryptograph puzzles that can be solved as a community. This isn't something I've gone over, but Heartbound actually has an ARG. For those unaware, an ARG, or alternative reality game, is a fictional game using clues and puzzles in the real world to get more pieces of the story. I don't have much to say about it other than the fact that it exists, so I'll give him this point at the very least. And I'll give him this next point too. The game does indeed have pretty nice art, although I do find it funny that the only area of praise I have for this game is something not directly made by Pirate at all. More gags than you can shake a stick at. Binder can lend you one of his if you don't bring your own. Well, Heartbound does try its best to have a sense of humor. I personally never found any joke in the game funny, but it does objectively contain them. Now let's take a look at the planned features and see if any of them have made it into the current build of Heartbound. Rebuild the town of Animus as you help its denizens conquer their fears or fix their relationships. This is not at all like the version of Animus I played, as you don't do anything involving rebuilding the town or fixing relationships. I do sorta get what this might be implying, as the entirety of Animus so far is just spent doing various side quests with the residents. What I think this may be referring to is an event that happens at the very end of the game where you meet an old married tortoise couple whose relationship is strained. However, before you can even do anything with these characters, Heartbound ends. I'm not joking. Literally right as we get into an element that even remotely resembles what he wrote about the game ends. And again, there's no rebuilding of the town present in this version at all, so I'm just gonna go ahead and label this as an unfulfilled promise. Collect mounds of secret goodies to help you through the trials and tribulations ahead. This is not true at all. There is nothing I ever collected that served a greater purpose. There's barely even trials and tribulations. The Ace Attorney game of the same name has more gameplay than Heartbound, and those games have actual fun stories with humorous writing that doesn't make me physically recoil. Tons of additional characters and combat encounters. Well, I guess this is technically correct, but I feel like adding new NPCs isn't exactly a super great selling point. And as we've gone over already, there are no more combat encounters than the one we've experienced so far, so this is yet another failed promise. More expansive areas to explore. This is just a flat out lie. The only areas in the game are extremely restrictive and have almost nothing in them to do outside of the game's main story. Not only that, but Animus isn't even one connected area. Every time you complete a character's storyline, you are immediately locked off from the previous area and a new one appears out of nowhere to allow you to reach the next character. Pirate Software is such an incompetent game designer that he somehow failed to make the only openish area of the game filled with various residents living in the same area not actually connected in any way, shape, or form. I seriously have no idea how you could even suggest you're gonna add more expansive areas and then create some of the most linear ones I've ever seen in any RPG. More mini-games per combat, and tons of combat encounters. This is not even remotely true. The game's only real encounter hasn't even received any other attack from the initial demo he released in 2017. More than 8 years later, and he has not found the time to create a single new minigame for this one battle, let alone tons of combat encounters. The final planned feature, learn about others by living through their memories if you defeat them in combat, is once again not something I ever experienced in the game, since the only battle I ever got into had no actual option, so I'm gonna go ahead and label this yet another failed promise. In my opinion, literally nearly every single promised feature here has never actually materialized in any way, shape, or form. In the near 10 years Heartbound has been in development for, the game has somehow devolved and failed to realize the vision originally presented. And I really don't get how he hasn't accomplished anything close to what he wanted the game to be. The game he initially envisioned Heartbound to be is ambitious, sure, but far from impossible to create. As for Animus itself, there's virtually nothing else to go over here, as you just go through each of these characters' side stories which boil down to say the good thing or say the bad thing. The good dialogue option is always on the top, and the bad one is always at the bottom. The game attempts to goad you into picking the bad option literally every single time it comes up, and it just gets very annoying very quickly. And if you're wondering, even though this is the only part of the game has had anything resembling real choices, the impact they make is so bizarre to me. If you go the bad route, you essentially just ignore most of the character's problems and skip through some parts of this act. And after doing it enough, you get thrown into another one of these darkened areas where all the characters begin to chastise you, but they really treat you like you've done something horrible to them when all you've really done is be distant. Look at what this character says here. Does their reaction match at all what you've been doing? They're treating you like some kind of monster just for not engaging with their bullshit. I was expecting the bad route to actually involve me doing some heinous activities, but instead you're more neutral than anything else, yet the game shames you for it. The only interesting thing that happened in my evil route playthrough was this glitch where the wrong text box was pulled up and this unfinished animation that was left in. But outside of this scene and maybe some slight dialogue changes, my second playthrough was nearly identical to my first, despite me actively trying to make big changes. All I've done is say no a bunch of times, and the game is treating me like I'm a serial killer. The actions I've taken do not at all match the responses they've generated. It just seems like such incompetent writing. Animus is so unfinished and has so little gameplay that it's impossible to fully dissect, but everything currently in the game doesn't fill me with a ton of confidence in the final product, nor do I think it's something that should have taken this long. Something really interesting I stumbled upon while watching a few pirate shorts was this claim he made while talking about some of Heartbound's earlier builds.
It sucks, dude. And that's okay. Because now, it looks like this. And now it has full day-night cycles. And now it has tons of environments and
This is just a complete fabrication. There is no day and night cycle present in Heartbound whatsoever. He even claimed this was a feature all the way back during Animus's first ever patch back in 2019, stating that it takes a full 24 minutes for a cycle to happen. So I tested this and waited a full 24 minutes and nothing happened, not a single change to the scenery occurred. The part he's showing here in this short is always set at night, and the time of day never changes within the game. You're just teleported here after a cutscene. There's not even any way to actually leave this area, so once again, it's another part of Animus that's completely disconnected from the rest. Outside of that, we've pretty much talked about everything in Heartbound. Overall, I'll be blunt, I think this game is terrible, and in no way, shape, or form feels like a game that's had nearly a decade spent on it. So far, Pirate's games are batting 0 for 2, but wait, we still have one more title to cover. Kinda. Kill the Moon is another twin-stick shooter released by Pirate Software. I say released, but this game actually hasn't released at all, only having a playable demo. Supposedly, the game will begin development after Heartbound has finished, and since Heartbound has been struggling to release even one major piece of content in nearly 2 years, and since Kill the Moon has received absolutely zero updates since this post, I find it highly unlikely that the game will ever actually come out. Still, let's try not to be too cynical and take a look at this demo to see what this game could potentially offer should it ever come to exist. You start off in this small purple space area, and the only thing you can do is enter the portal to begin the actual game. Stages in this game are randomly generated, which in my opinion is probably the worst way of handling levels in most cases, as intentional level design almost always works much better in 2D games in my experience, but let's see if the game handles it well at all. All the player has to do to progress is move forward. The only things impeding their progress are these small dinosaur creatures. When killed, their skeletons spawn and will continue to attack you. There are also occasionally these spiky areas that require a spring to get through, as well as the occasional power-up once you've reached a certain stretch. And yeah, that's pretty much it. What you're seeing now is essentially the entire demo. I think there may also be some sort of boss should you reach the end of this level, but I couldn't even be bothered to get that far. The game just doesn't feel great to play. I don't think the twin-stick gameplay works for something like this. Kinda makes me long for something more akin to Contra. I think the game is supposed to be fast-paced, but it doesn't really have any movement options outside of a double jump to make the game feel faster. Outside of that, I really don't have much to say about this. It feels more like an alpha for a game rather than a simple demo. I have no idea why you would ever announce and release a demo for a game in the state Kill the Moon is currently in. Only other comment I have is that the music is terrible. I don't know who the composer is, and no offense, but I don't think this is your best work. The sprite work on the dinosaurs is also pretty good. Reminds me a bit of Metal Slug. Other than that, there's virtually nothing else to say about Kill the Moon. They made an entire Reddit for this game that doesn't even exist yet, and as far as I can tell, Pirate and his team have gone radio silent on the status of this game. And because Pirate has continued to struggle to finish Heartbound, I have severe doubts that Kill the Moon will ever be a real video game. And I don't really see that as a particularly bad thing, since what currently exists doesn't fill me with any sense of promise. And with that, we've covered every single video game created by Pirate Software as of the making of this video. There are some other miscellaneous things like a Minecraft mod and some creations made eons ago on Newgrounds, but I don't think these matter for the video. In Pirate Software's 10 years as an indie game developer, he has made one game in early access, and a demo for a title that will likely never release. It's amazing to me that Pirate Software of all people won an award for being a game dev, considering how poor not only his output is, but the quality of the games themselves. I do not think Pirate Software is a good video game developer. I'd go as far to say he's an honest-to-God embarrassment to any and all indie devs struggling out there. He alone currently has more resources, connections, and fans than 90% of people, and instead of using any of those as further fuel to finish his game, he has instead chosen to sit on stream and play grindy MMOs for 14 hours a day. As a massive fan of the RPG genre, it is insulting to even include Heartbound in the same league as the games that inspired it. It is astounding to me that he could make something that doesn't capture any of the elements that made those games special. I don't think he has any fundamental understanding of what actually made these games good, and as someone who spent a large portion of his life playing most of the titles he took inspiration from, there's something very sad about that to me. As it currently stands, I don't recommend anything created by Pirate Software, and unless he shifts his entire approach to the medium, I doubt this will ever change for me.